Hello, I'm Steve Swain, the director of the Montgomery Fellows Program and a professor of music at Dartmouth College. On our Montgomery website, you can see the names and photos of the more than 250 women and men that the program has brought to campus since the program's beginning in the late 1970s. Author Phil Klay was slated to be our 257th resident fellow this summer, holding court from the Montgomery House on Occam Pond and exemplifying the tagline on our website about bringing exceptional people to an exceptional place. Given that Phil is a Dartmouth alumnus, he already knows that Dartmouth is indeed an exceptional place. To lay his own claim to being exceptional, Phil agreed to undertake with us something we had never tried before, a virtual residency. Rather than deliver a single public address, Phil engaged in conversations with different members of the Dartmouth community. I encourage you to join the many people who have already gone to Phil's Montgomery webpage and taken in the wisdom, humor, and humanity that Phil and his interlocutors have offered in their musings. Tonight's roundtable will also find its way to that page so others can participate in what we are all about to experience in real time. Before I turn things over to Phil, I should give you some ideas about how our time together will proceed. We have assembled a panel of Dartmouth student and alumni veterans to join Phil in a discussion that Phil will moderate. The panelists and I expect that their remarks will generate questions that you might like them to address. I invite you to submit those questions by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Phil and I will be monitoring those questions, and we will try to answer as many as possible, both during the roundtable itself and then in the open Q&A that will begin around 7 o'clock. At that time, I'll return and direct your questions that haven't been answered to the various members of the panel. Unlike other Zoom events that you may have attended where people raise their Zoom hands or communicate via the chat function, you should know that chat has been disabled for attendees, and I will not be calling on persons who raise their Zoom hands. So again, please feel free to direct your questions to Phil and the other panelists by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Lastly, as we wind up this webinar after 7, I will post a link to our roundtable reception, which will take place in another Zoom room. During the reception, you will have an opportunity to talk to Phil and the panelists, as well as to catch up with other friends who are in attendance. I believe that takes care of tonight's ground rules. Having done that, Captain Phil Klay, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks to those of us who are joining in, and especially thanks to my fellow panelists tonight. This is very exciting to me. Dartmouth was really important and formative for me as a person, as a writer. It's where I met my wife. It's where I met some of the most important people, mentors in my intellectual life. It's also where I made a series of dubious decisions, deciding to start up doing rugby, boxing, and then ultimately joining the Marine Corps. So I have a great group of Dartmouth veterans who are going to introduce themselves very shortly. So I'll just say I'm Phil Klay. I'm a Dartmouth 05 and a former Marine public affairs officer. And we're going to go in order of class year. So the next one is Nathan. Nathan, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Phil, and welcome to all those who are joining this great program from home. My name is Nathan Bruschi. I'm a Dartmouth 10 from 2010 until 2015. I served in the Navy as an intelligence officer doing deployments from East Asia to Central America. Since getting out, I now run a small business in upstate New York where I have the extreme pleasure of serving my neighbors as their elected county legislator. I'm very excited to be here.
Diane?
Good evening. My name is Diane Cammarata. I'm part of the Dartmouth class of 2021, finishing up my major in classical studies. I was a member of the New Hampshire Army National Guard and served as a flight medic, a non-rated aircrew flight instructor, and finally finished my career as the state air medical NCO. Phil, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
And I just realized that I am the one who screwed up the order, skipping over Kate and Brad. So Kate, you graduated from Dartmouth earlier.
Thanks, Phil. Hi, I'm Kate. I'm class of 2013. After graduating, I joined the Marine Corps as a logistics officer and served until 2017, and then served in the reserves for 2 more years as a civil affairs officer and public affairs. So lots of affairs in there. And I'm currently studying fiction writing at Columbia University now.
Brad?
Thanks, Phil. Hi, I'm Brad Carney, and I served in the Army until December 2015. When I got out, I went to Dartmouth. I'm a Dartmouth 20, and I studied philosophy. And then I am taking the LSAT right now and planning on going to law school in fall 2021.
And then finally, we have Colson. You want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name's Colson. I'm a 22 at Dartmouth. I served in the Air Force from 2011 to 2017. I joined right out of high school. I was security forces, stationed in Turkey and England, a little bit of brief deployment in Qatar, and then found my way back to my home state of California. At Dartmouth, I'm studying government.
Fantastic. And Nathan, you also studied in government, right? And have a real world practical influence in government right now. Yeah. So I wondered if there was a connection, and you felt there was a connection or a through line between the sorts of values that you learned at Dartmouth, the things that you learned in the service and what impelled you to go into the service, and also what you're currently doing right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, one thing that I think the quotes that you really see that make up the tapestry of Dartmouth myth. There's one by John Dickey, and he was challenging, I think it's a class in 1954, to go make the world's problems their problems. And I took this adage quite seriously. I felt like I was very, very lucky to have gone to Dartmouth. And while I was there, I had a lot of my friends had come to Dartmouth from foreign countries, and I really saw how hard they had worked to get here. And then when graduation came, a lot of them, weren't allowed to stay. And meanwhile, I got my citizenship by this random lottery birthright that I happened to be born in this country at this time. And I think the combination that really weighed on me to be the beneficiary of so many gifts, and also looking for the right way to pay them forward. And so I really saw this as a chance to kind of earn my citizenship. I think a lot of Dartmouth, the Dartmouth experience that I saw was about people thinking about much more than just themselves. And that's very much what the curriculum was like in the Gov department, was thinking about systems and how can you make a difference. And at that time, we were in a war, and you really couldn't feel it on campus. But I felt that by raising my hand and signing up, I could kind of earn this citizenship, and if not pay back a lot of the gifts that I had been given, at least try to be worthy of them, that I would at least have done something with them. And I think that's kind of stayed with me. It stayed with me coming home. I think people are shocked to fully understand how much of their lived experience is governed at that local level. I think we are all naturally drawn to federal topics, and when that attention is raised up, a lot of stuff can happen at the local level that you'll miss. And so coming home, I spent my entire career going around the world, making other countries safe, rebuilding other countries. And when I got home, I realized that there's a mission to be continued here. And so that's why I put my name up, and I ran a campaign. It's definitely a lot of hard work that goes in, even when it's a very small raise. And that, I guess what that lets me do is, even though now that I'm working in business, I can still have that same impact that really drew me into the armed forces through my service at the county level.
That's great. I often feel like that people lose sight of that local level and the importance of it because it's so easy to get drawn into national politics. And one thing that I find is people will look at what's happening in national politics and become sort of cynical or disaffected or feel as though there's not a lot you can do. And I always tell them, like, whatever the issue is that you really care about, there are probably organizations that are making real impact on people's lives in some way related to that issue right now. And you just need to sort of, go out, find those folks and put your shoulder to the wheel. Now, I wanted to ask Colson, so you're a current student, you were in the military, you did the military first, and I wondered if you, what your feeling was in terms of the relationship between your time in service and what that instilled in you, and what you feel like you felt and what you were getting coming to Dartmouth.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my time in service obviously taught me the importance of like duty and discipline. I think it gave me an opportunity to be in an incredibly diverse environment, which prepared me for the collegiate experience. And then it also introduced me to college, strangely enough. I think higher education is not always supported in all the branches, but in the Air Force, we are encouraged to pursue our higher education. And I was going up for promotion for senior airmen, and there's this program called Below the Zone, and I initially just wanted to be competitive for that program, so I enrolled in my first college courses when I was stationed in Turkey. I took philosophy as my first course, actually, which coming right out of boot camp and tech school was an interesting experience to have to think for myself for the first time, as compared to following strict orders. But it was a good introduction into college and the liberal arts ideology. And yeah, I fell in love with school from that point on. I think post high school, being sort of my own man in the military was a way for me to sort of gain my independence in a way. And yeah, the military encouraged me initially to go to college, and then gave me the opportunity to utilize my GI Bill when I separated. And so that's how I found my way to Dartmouth.
That's great. And Diane, what about yourself in terms of that transition, what it felt like?
My experience is a little bit different. I didn't enlist immediately out of high school. I actually started to go to Bloomsburg University of Pennsylvania with a scholarship in the senior ROTC program. However, I learned that I wouldn't be able to take the option of National Guard at that time, which is what I had wanted. So I turned down the scholarship and came home, tried going to school outside of that, and learned that college is expensive. So I went and spoke to a National Guard recruiter, and I've been in school while serving at the same time. And it's been unique in its experience and balancing of time, which is where I felt a community college was incredibly beneficial for me. And the National Guard has a unique program where they have the federal tuition assistance, and then there's also federal tuition waiver in addition to the GI Bill. Now I have to play twice, and I'm at about 90% for GI Bill, which I'm using now. But the National Guard allowed me to finish my associate's degrees and transfer to Dartmouth College before ever having to touch that. And what I think the Army has really helped me with is, one, my writing skills improved significantly, which I think is kind of interesting when you take a look at a memorandum for record, but more so in terms of being able to use an assertive voice or an active voice.
Yeah.
Whereas before I was a very passive writer. In addition to that, time management, organization skills, and just confidence in myself. I grew up with the National Guard, and through that, I kind of prepared myself for stepping through the doors at Dartmouth College.
That's really funny what you said about the how it changed your writing style. I think of Ulysses S. Grant, the voice, the sort of no nonsense, authoritative, somewhat steely but not lurid voice that he uses in the memoirs. It wasn't just, it's not just that his memoirs were a great book, but they're actually tremendously influential to American letters, right? So people like Gertrude Stein and Hemingway, right, are influenced by by a style that comes straight out of the military. So it's funny that you found the same thing.
Yeah, Phil, actually, I started reading this, I think, because when we talked last time, you had mentioned it, and you're exactly correct. Just the economy of words that Grant has, like how he's able to describe an incredibly complex battle in a few lines, like that's the thing that I took away, and that's what makes the book great, not the action.
Right. One of the things that I was thinking of that's really just, I think, probably different, maybe from maybe you and me, Nathan, had more of this experience. But when I was at Dartmouth, the war was such a topic of discussion at Dartmouth, and it feels as though even though the wars continue, that sense has faded from public view. And I wondered, for some of the folks here, and maybe you could answer this, Brad, what it is, what your experience being a student veteran is right now, how people relate to you, and whether they actually relate that to the national conversation or not.
Yeah, I think it's actually just completely removed from, so like your status as a veteran is completely removed from any type of war or anything like that,
Yeah.
right? Because people don't even realize it's still going on, or maybe they do, but it's just not a topic of conversation. It's not an active, thing. It's like more like, especially I was, on Dartmouth campus from 2016 to 2020. So just a lot of social justice things and things like that. And so, when people came to know me, it was just, as a veteran, what did you do in the military? And then, did you deploy? Did you do this stuff? But like, again, just kind of very far removed from the war effort.
Mm-hmm. And so there's not that necessarily, like, they're not drawing you into political discussions as a representative of like the warrior class of America.
Right. Yeah. No. It's completely removed. It was like, besides your own personal experience inside, deployed or something like that, it almost is like an individual nugget of information, and very far removed from, you're part of this system. You're part of, there was, I imagine maybe in 2006, 2007, maybe that was a huge thing. You're part of the system. But 2015, 2016, 2017, it's like, oh, you did that thing that we used to do, that war thing, huh? Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Now, do you like it like that, or would you prefer the broader public conversation, or?
Well, I never got canceled. I never got canceled, so I was happy because it's like, oh, I'm not even part of that. I don't know what that is, and I never had to engage in that like bigger discussion. I'm not saying that's necessarily good, but I am saying it's like, well, especially nowadays, like I always wanted to be more. I was aware of my surroundings at Dartmouth, and so outside of maybe a gov class, where it's like I'm very happy to talk about these kind of national topics about defense or what we ought to be doing overseas. I was actually happy to kind of have it removed from my person, outside of class, but inside of class for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, Kate, you are both a Marine and a writer, which is two very good things in my book, and I feel like that. Sorry, the rest of you guys, it's okay. That sense of the kind of, even whether we're at war or not, and the public perception of what it is to be a vet is very much shaped by a lot of the cultural myths. Is that something that surrounds service, that surround our discussion of the war? Is that something that you're tackling in your own writing? And also, is that how is that something that you sort of navigate personally right now?
Yeah, I think the concept of writing about the military and war it's really complicated, and I think it's definitely something I'm tackling in my own writing, because I think largely what kind of gets digested by the American public it tends to skew, male, cisgender, heterosexual, and white, and
Yep.
and that's kind of a reality of how the military writ large is often portrayed, and that's everyone's military experience is so different, and I think being able to use writing as a tool to kind of convey the nuance and convey those differences, and really just the inherent complications of how diverse the experience can be for people, is really important, and definitely something that I'm exploring.
Yeah. And it can be, there's that diversity that you experience in the Corps. I mean, one of the things that I always think about is just the range of people that I met while I was in the service, but also the range of types of experience that people have. And one of the things I think, Colson, you had brought this up when I was talking with you earlier about just one of those dividing lines is a sort of generational dividing line between those who even remember 9/11 as an originating point in these wars, and those who don't, and what it feels like to be sort of straddling that line. Is that something that you've actually sort of navigated at Dartmouth?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've come across people in my class who've said, "Oh, 9/11 is one of those things that we just use as an excuse to justify all these things, and it was so long ago." And it's because they don't really remember it because they were either too young or they weren't born yet. But I think, for most Americans who remember that day, it had a large impact on them, and they saw how the world sort of shifted in the aftermath of 9/11. And so personally, I was around 8 years old, and so I wasn't old enough to have totally nuanced understanding of, especially with all the various international players in the aftermath of 9/11 and America's response. But I certainly knew that it had impacted our nation, and it can be difficult to connect with people at school who just weren't old enough to know what was happening during that time.
Mm-hmm. And how formative it was. Diane, you're in a war stories class right now, and with Roberta Stewart, which I had the privilege of sitting in on the other day. And I was wondering, in terms of that diversity of perspectives that we were talking about, if there are things that you think are missing from the cultural conversation, or that could be better explored, or that you're particularly enjoying sort of finding anew through other work.
So the War Stories class actually is designed to explore all of those different perspectives and take a look at what elements of war stories seem to transcend through time. And we started off with one of Homer's epics, the Odyssey. And it's a really interesting class because the majority of the students are not veterans, and we even have a few students who have never known a veteran their entire life. So this was an eye-opening experience. And what I really appreciate about this, about reading these different stories together, including a few of your own, is what I take away as a veteran from your stories, and what someone who doesn't have the experiences of being at war get out of it. And in some cases, I feel like what they see is a richer picture than what I see. Especially because I am, in some cases, a little emotionally charged. There are some elements to stories that are too close to the heart at that point, or I just don't have words for. And I've enjoyed how other students kind of bring forth or find words for me, or in a way, kind of provide me with the words that I didn't realize I could use to describe a particular experience.
Well, that's fantastic.
Can I piggyback off that?
Yeah, go for it.
So what Diane said and Colson said, like when talking about 9/11, one of the things, so like I'm a philosophy major, and Dartmouth is very analytic philosophy heavy. And so I'm very abstract, I love working in the abstract. I don't want to tell any personal stories. And the one difference between, like the one thing I've seen where it's like trying to talk about 9/11, it's like I almost cannot talk about it. But and I never would have thought I was that type of person, because it brings out so much. It's just like, it's so deep, right? It's such an emotionally deep time and point where it changed entire United States. And so, what kind of Diane was saying, it's like, oh, I just can't even talk. I don't have the words to kind of express what I'm feeling. That it showed me like there are some things about this war, like everything surrounding it, where it's you can't just abstract everything. It does, something will touch you, and it's just so deep and meaningful. And it's like, wow, all these other people just kind of don't understand it. It's crazy.
Can I piggyback off of that?
Yeah.
In addition, the power of sharing these narratives is the different methods in which a story can be told. Sometimes it's direct and gruesome. We have read stories where it takes you into the mind of someone who has tried to work their way through their own guilt or their own grief. And then in addition, it's just taking elements of nature or poetry as a means to not necessarily tell the story, but show the story. And in an effort, I think, to kind of bridge the gap between the military service member and the civilian side, because there's a very large gap, I think, of understanding, and literature is a wonderful way to try to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and it's happening at Dartmouth with current students. That's great. Kate, I wondered if the various things that are that they're bringing up here, if there are particular works that resonate with you, or particular things that you feel need to be expressed or haven't been expressed yet. And if that sort of bridging function is the way that you see the role of what you're doing.
I think for sure, thinking of maybe writing about the military as a bridging function is super important. And I think just not necessarily specific works, but specific experiences maybe of either myself or my Marines. There's such a broad spectrum of what could be talked about. You could talk about training, and you could talk about going to the rifle range, or you could talk about cockroaches in a K-span or a tent, red pens, editing letters of instruction. There's so many different aspects to what I think makes up the totality of one's experience, and trying to put all of those things in the same container, I think, can serve as that kind of that bridging mechanism. But I think just lately I've been trying to read more widely and explore books that maybe deal with war indirectly. And I think that's another way of kind of diving into the historical timeline of the wars, and seeing how they're impacting not just military service members, but maybe their families, their friends, passage of time just through even storefronts and that kind of thing. So I think bringing all of that together can really end up acting as a shaping function for sure.
Yeah. Some of my favorite sort of, when I think of war stories, I think some of my favorites, or the ones that have been really productive to me, are like stories like, Mavis Gallant, where you're seeing, World War II, so that this woman is running a hotel, or Beer in the Snooker Club, which is this Egyptian novel about these basic like hipsters during the Suez Crisis. Yeah, that's great. Now, one of the
I have a quick thought on that, Phil. Too.
Yeah.
My mind went to the same place from Kate's comment of like, what are the really seminal war stories, like All Quiet on the Western Front, and then there's all these kind of World War II narratives. There's the Ken Burns Civil War documentary. They're all kind of these seminal works, and they all kind of speak to a certain narrative that they have at the time. The Civil War being this fight of good and evil. You see World War II having that. World War I is a bit more complicated. I think today it's really tough. And one thing that I kind of got from your book is like it's kind of tough to make sense of like what are we really fighting for, in part because a lot of the work that gets done gets reversed later on. We're fighting wars on behalf of like other people, and sometimes the governments that you're working to prop up don't always live up to the values that they say that they have. Sometimes as time goes on, just like the practical effects of politics come in. And I think that's always been one thing that I've seen in the more modern veterans, that in World War II, it was a relatively brief war from our side, just a 4-year war, a stupendous victory with a definite day that it ended, incredible narratives of good versus evil, and a rededication to like educating the people that had gone through and done this service. And today it's like long drawn out. We pulled out of Iraq like how many times now, and yet there's still people there. So there's never an end date. And when people come home, there's the thank you for your service stuff, and there's the honor flights you see, but they're kind of creeping back into a nation that never really paused, never really stopped while they were gone. And I think that's kind of the weird tragedy of this moment is like what are the themes that we're going to see coming out of the books in 20 years from now that kind of look back on this moment. There's like Brad's point of there's this really intense crucible that all these children go through as they witness 9/11 live on television, and then they channel those energies at least into, I think, the CENTCOM environment. The Middle East is a much more complicated narrative as to what's going on there, and it really hasn't. We never got that great finish line.
You violated the no acronyms rule.
CENTCOM. I know CENTCOM. Yeah.
Central Command. Yeah. By the way, it's funny you mentioned 9/11 popping up again. I didn't watch it on TV because I was on my Dimensions of Dartmouth trip. So wow. I was out on the Appalachian Trail, and we kept running into people who would say, "Oh, somebody flew planes into the World Trade Center," and we thought that they were screwing with us, because we were out away from civilization. And then eventually we realized that no, this is actually had happened. And so then we had to hike back to civilization. So I didn't have that experience that I think, even though I'm from New York, my parents were working in Manhattan at the time. I didn't have that experience that people all over the country did of being sort of glued to their television, wondering what was happening, seeing this terrible thing. It was something that I heard about, and then only later when I came home and went to the site, was sort of had that, I think, visceral reaction that other people had experiencing it. But one thing that I wondered. So one of the things that you did, you went back into public service, and we were talking about sort of stories and art as a means of sort of bridging between sort of civilians and the military. Another thing I'm thinking about is in relation to what you're saying about how the wars don't end. and I'm thinking about a friend of mine, the writer and former Marine Elliot Ackerman, talking about how in these wars you have to make your own separate peace, right? Because you just sort of have to, after you did a bunch of deployments, and just saying, okay, now I'm done, right? The war's not done, but I am. And I'm thinking about another friend of mine who felt that his service wasn't complete until he'd come back and worked in the Parks Department, right? And sort of continued serving, but serving at home, right? And serving alongside fellow Americans, right? Still sort of bound by a kind of common purpose, but this time one of peace. And I wonder if you felt that sort of engaging in public service has fulfilled some of that same sort of function of drawing you back together with your fellow countrymen that people talk about in terms of that.
I think it is very powerful, the idea that we shouldn't reserve all these virtues for war. That we have honor and heroism, like it's a military thing. It's because they're putting their bodies on the line. They should get the benefits. And there's all these quiet ways of doing service back home that I think are much more impactful, even that should be celebrated. The challenge, I think, with the public service is probably more tactical one in this environment, is that even at the local level, where I'm lucky I have great colleagues and it's a pretty bipartisan chamber. I had a local law get passed on Tuesday, and it was 38-1, so like an overwhelmingly positive law. And this is a law that had been like tried and failed before, but because we built a coalition for it. The challenge today, though, is like, if you want to run for office, if that's the vehicle by which you want to keep serving, you have to be like prepared that half of the public is going to actively hate you. They're going to spend time out of their day hating you because of the party that you're in. And I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why that's the case. And I see a lot of good people, I think, being chased out of public service, and I don't blame them for a second. There is an incredible cost that comes on you and your family. I think I'm able to separate it. There's a great, so Ron Heifetz is a leadership guru at Harvard Kennedy School, and he's telling a story about how he was talking with like the King of Jordan, so kind of name dropping that he hangs out with these people. But I believe that it was the King of Jordan, that he had an assassination attempt on him, and Ron was like, what's like how did that make you feel? There's people that they're trying to kill you. And what he was saying is that they weren't trying to kill me, they were trying to kill the king, and I just happened to be the king. And I think that's how I approach it, is like the same way that like I'm sure the guys that went to the Middle East, you're facing some pretty scary dudes. They're not trying to kill Philip Clay. They're trying to kill, the people in their country. They're trying to fight the other force. You're not shooting them because of who they are. It's because of like what they're doing. And I think if you're able to, in the armed forces, there's plenty of times I had to stand up for people and take a lot of heat, but like that's what it took. And the reason why they're attacking me is because I'm the guy in charge. The reason why the bad guys don't like us is because we're the ones here. If you care about it, you should plow ahead and be able to say, yeah, they're saying not nice things about me, but that's because I'm king. Like they're trying to kill the king. They're not trying to kill you. I wish there was a way. I wish there was I think a system where there's more of this camaraderie in serving, where it went beyond the politics, which is a zero-sum game, and there was more of like a civilian conservation corps, a modern equivalent of we're all going to embark on this work together, and it's going to be a journey that we all go on together. The same way that we all went out to war together, we come home together. And I've seen this idea bat around a lot, and I think the times demand it, and it's really unfortunate that we don't see it happening.
Yeah, so this actually relates to a question that we have from Colonel Matt Putnam. Thank you for tuning in and for asking a question, which is about the sort of the difficulty of seeing through the smoke of now and the state of the nation. And he writes about one of his best civilian leaders, we both believe that military service is not the only form of valid service to our nation, though we both served in the U.S. Army Medical Corps. What are your thoughts related to service and increasing our individual awareness of others? And I strongly believe in service, and I think that it's unhealthy in our nation when we almost sort of deify military service as this sort of abstract thing sometimes, and yet, you know, our job, you know, our primary duty is service to the nation more generally, right? And I feel that it is. It's very troubling when other forms of service are undervalued, and I think it would be a really beneficial thing if we expanded opportunities for service and benefits, and to attract people for different types of service. I think that it would have good effects on us more broadly as citizens, because it would, you know, give you the experience of being with people from all walks of life in all different parts of the country. I think that sort of my pride in my nation, my patriotism in my nation was increased through service, even though I have, you know, I've written some pretty aggressive things about the wars that I served in. And I wanted to throw that particular question also to Colson, because I think you had spoken to me earlier about your feelings about service and opportunities for service in America more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. I resonate with how you articulated the importance of service more broadly. And just one point that I'll add is, you know, as somebody who enlisted in the military right out of high school, I personally didn't have a whole lot of opportunities to go directly to college. And so the military for me was really a pathway for social mobility. And I think expanding our definition of service and, as Nathan mentioned, creating a sort of 21st century civilian conservation corps. I mean, there's certainly a lot of work to do here at home. And I think particularly in these troubling economic times, we can utilize some Keynesian economics in order to get people back to work and, you know, unite the country again, and advance opportunities for people after their service to utilize something like the GI Bill that will allow them to take the next step in their career.
So you'd like to see it both because you think it would be sort of healthy for us sort of civically, but also for in terms of expanding opportunities and giving people more sort of pathways in American life.
Absolutely. I think there are certainly educational access programs out there, which I 100% support. I just so happen to fall within a category in a rural part of California, in a farming town, sort of middle class. Had two parents that didn't go to college, but there was nobody really targeting me personally, telling me that I should go to college. And so the military was that pathway for me. And, you know, I had some, you know, I think part of joining the military as an enlisted person as well was seeing that there were people who came into the military, and you guys can attest to this as those who were officers, being in command, having a managerial position, flying planes, being in charge of a nuclear reactor, all of these things that require skills and sort of higher level of aptitude. And I always aspired to that level. And so seeing that sort of like tiered system within the military made me realize that I needed to go and earn my degree in order to reach that level. And I had some officers who were able to point me in the right direction and sort of steer me away from the for-profit colleges that maybe some of my colleagues had been attracted to, and just offer me some advice that I didn't necessarily have in my local community or in my family.
Yeah, great. Does anybody else want to jump in on that question of sort of service more broadly?
Yeah, I do real quick. You know, what's really interesting, and like this national conversation has been happening for a few years now. I think, what's the guy's name? Mike Rowe he was like, you know, go to trade school and don't go to, you know, and not everyone needs to go to college. And one thing here, it's like, I mean, sure, you could go to trade school too, but maybe you can't afford that, or maybe you're just, that's not what you want to do. And it's like kind of what Colson's talking about, these kind of pathways to allow lots of people to have a pathway to like see how they can move forward in their life, and you know, a kind of national service where they can kind of do their time, right, in whatever avenue, and then kind of move forward. It's like that would be great. And we have like everyone else said, you know, we have lots of things to do in the nation, so there's no shortage of work, I don't think.
I have friends in Tel Aviv, and they were telling me how like the conversations there don't begin with where do you go to college. It was like, what did you do when you served? And there's real meritocracy in their armed forces, such that like if you're in a certain, like if you're in their crypto division, you know, that's like going to Goldman Sachs. You know, that's your gold stamp on the resume. That changes the arc of your life. And yeah, I think to Brad's point, it's tragic that yeah, I think the military is excellent at like the mobility to the middle class, like it's that mobility, but we don't see it like all the way up and down.
All the way up and down in terms of what do you mean?
It's like I don't think it basically what the military I think has been really good at doing is it's good at giving access to education at kind of a base level, increasingly through the work of Jim Wright at like the top levels. Though I would imagine a lot of the kids that, you know, Dartmouth can recruit, as seen here, they're all really smart kids. You know, they're probably go very, very far on their own. The veterans that I went to Harvard Business School with, I mean, looking around, all of them, they're probably going to get there anyways. You know, they were, you know, they all went to like Brown or Harvard. And you don't see that like person who, you know, really didn't come from very much, but through brute force of their work ethic and their intelligence, which was recognized by a military that could put them to use solving some important problem. You don't see those people, I think, get all the way like up to the top of the strata. And I think that's kind of one of the limits. Like, why not? Why don't we create a world in which, again, like you have a job interview, the very first question is like, what was your service?
And what was your service more broadly? Not necessarily a military service, but what did you do for the country more broadly, right?
Right.
And relating it to something that is sort of equally open to everyone. Right.
And it's, you know, it's a great way to also stratify, you know, because if you perform well, it's not like your service was more, you know, more challenging, but it's the fact that like you came in, you took an aptitude. I mean, figure we had talked about this prior, but the military, I find, is like it's a very lefty place. You know, we have radical pay transparency, you know, benchmarked pay grades, not a lot of income inequality, like zero homelessness on base,
free healthcare
for everybody. You know, the gender discrimination piece when it comes to pay is like, you know, I'm sure it still happens, but it's, you know, it's a heck of a better system for that. And a lot of the jobs you get, they're based on competitive tests. You know, if you do well on a test, that's how you get a higher rank. It's how you get selected for flight school. And so there really is a pretty egalitarian method for separating people, you know, based on their, you know, not based on where they were born and who their parents were, but based on what they can really do. And I think the military uses it for great effect. And I would love to see that kind of continue outside of the armed forces, as opposed to, I think, like treating service as like, oh, that's a nice thing, like you're a good person, and then welcome back to the real world. It's not really. That's, you know, that's a separate space.
I think the military as socialist utopia in right in some ways there are other ways in which the military has certainly got its share of problems and particular types of discrimination, I think. But I do very much like the idea of thinking about sort of institutions that are much more accessible and allowing people to succeed. Does anybody else want to jump in on the question of service?
I guess I have something. What really comes to mind is because I was looking at Colonel Putnam's question again, relating service and increasing individual awareness of others. And I think that can go across branches as well as civilian sector, military sector, and how we can help each other. And I think in just service itself builds community. And in building community, there's an understanding of how what your specific line of work does is beneficial to another. As an example, in deployments, there's cross-service interaction quite a bit. I was in Helmand province as a dust-off unit, and our overwatch was the 2nd Marine Air Wing. And I got to get a better understanding of what Marines have to deal with in comparison to what I personally have to work with. And on stateside, the New Hampshire Army National Guard also works with the state in terms of search and rescue up in the mountains. So there are these opportunities for overlap and understanding. And I think broadening beyond just those small sectors could be really beneficial and build a greater community. And in many cases, bridge that gap of not really knowing, what service members have to deal with, and starting a new dialogue, I think, is what that would be able to create for us.
And I guess there's a final question I see that Steve has put in about how the arc of the panelist life was changed from attending Dartmouth, if at all. I suppose I can start that off. I mean, I already mentioned it. Met my wife, met important intellectual mentors, people who some people who I still keep in touch with. My thesis advisor, Tom Slay, is now a good friend. And I think that in terms of what I was trying to learn to do at Dartmouth, which was write about things that I felt were really important, and trying to communicate those things to other people. And they often were things that are related to, I think, American civic life. I was a public affairs officer in the military, so that was directly related. And then it's essentially the same thing that I do now, though in a different form. And so it was a matter of building up the skills to be able to try and do that to the maximum effectiveness, as well as sort of the people around me who supported me. And I think that the community that I found was deeply important as far as that goes. Anybody else want to answer that question? We've got about 5 minutes left, so.
Honestly, it changed my entire life. And I don't mean in a minor way. I was coming from the Army, very much, I was only on the line. I've never been not on the line, and the line just means like in an infantry unit, all male, like that environment for multiple years. And I started to read philosophy as I was getting closer to getting out. And I thought I was doing philosophy. And, you get to Dartmouth and you're like, oh, that's not what I was doing. I don't know what I was doing, but it was not philosophy. But just realizing or given the ability to think about problems, and it's not I was given the ability, it's just more that I was shaped in a way that made those types of conversations I wanted to have very constructive. And so I could, get information from articles. I could understand how to read court cases. It allows access. It allowed me access to just, it seems like an endless amount of information to where I can digest it now. And it's not something I could probably ever pay back, because it seems like it'll be valuable for the rest of my life.
That's great.
I'll jump in after Brad and sort of, yeah, I agree. The analytical skills that that Dartmouth allows you to develop are just absolutely unmatched. I think, you know, going off this theme of service, ever since I got to Dartmouth, I've had opportunities to continue serving, like initially through an interest in what's happening with climate change. And I got involved with the sustainability community on campus and with the Irving Institute. And I was able to go to West Virginia and learn more about the coal mining industry, and down to Houston and along through to New Orleans and go along the whole Gulf Coast to try and understand just the interplay between energy and society and all of the various political and environmental issues that brings up. And then additionally, the first summer that I had between my freshman and sophomore year, I'm currently in my second summer in my sophomore summer. My first summer, I was able to get an internship in Washington, D.C., which was incredible. I had never been there. I worked for the U.S. Green Building Council and was generously supported by DUSA's scholarship, the Dartmouth Uniform Service Alumni Association, with which Nathan started, and the Winnie Huang Fund. And additionally, the same scholarship fund helped me come out to Los Angeles and continue service at that local level. I worked for the LA Mayor's Office of Military and Veterans Affairs in the winter, this last winter. And so it has opened up so many doors for me that I couldn't have even dreamt of prior to coming to Dartmouth. So I'm eternally grateful.
I'll jump in. I think I'll answer this kind of in a way of how Dartmouth kind of prepared me for serving in the military and then kind of life after. But you know, it was certainly a huge opportunity to be able to go there undergraduate. And I think what it did was it really teaches you how to think, I think, and to relate to others. And to kind of bring this full circle back to the one of the questions about like individual awareness for others, I think the intellectual discussions and, you know, non-intellectual discussions that you have at a place like Dartmouth prepared me to be able to have that kind of empathy and an understanding of, you know, my Marines and how to be able to relate to them, even if we had completely different backgrounds and life experiences. So I think, you know, people can't always draw a straight line, I think, between the liberal arts and military service, but I think you can absolutely make the case for it, and how just the humanities and thinking in general can prepare you for, you know, on a fundamental level, being able to relate and care for and lead humans. So, and
to pick up the thread that Kate started there, and one of the I think the moments that I think crystallized for me my path to go towards service is there was some news documentary, and there was a reporter embedded, I think it was with a Marine Corps unit, and they were in Afghanistan. Some Lance Corporal, he was the senior man on the scene, and he was having to talk to this village elder. And it's very clear that, you know, through the language barrier, the customs barrier, he was getting very frustrated at not being able to be understood by this old man with a red beard. And what stood out to me is, like, you know, all these thousands of miles away from Washington, like, this corporal is our state. Like, he is the face of the government, come all the way, there. And I think there's a question of who do we want to be there? Like, who would be best served? And I think you want someone who has had the benefits that Dartmouth has to actually offer. The broad-based liberal education. I think the ability through the D plan to be much more experimental in your learning, to travel more by virtue of the 10-week courses where you only take 3 classes, really go, I think, deeper into a subject. And that, as the world gets more complicated, as the military has to take on a lot more responsibilities, you want someone that has that mental flexibility to kind of be out there. And so whenever I go back to Dartmouth and I kind of make the case, it's like, I want to know why you guys shouldn't join the armed forces. Here you are, you're young and bright, you want to travel the world, for the ones that care about foreign policy, that they have that as well. How else could they possibly use this degree to the maximum extent except to go into the armed forces? And I think that Dartmouth made me very prepared, having not come from a military family, having really never thought about service until my senior year. I thought it'd be very natural.
Great. And does anybody else want to jump in, or should we? Diane,
I feel like this is kind of a difficult question for me, especially since I came to Dartmouth just last fall and I served before attending. I feel like there's a lot that the military has given me to help me be successful at Dartmouth, and part of that was working as the state aeromedical NCO, where I worked with age groups from 17 all the way up to their 60s. So I came in with an open mind, and I try my best to take a look at or listen to fresh perspectives, especially from the younger generations. But what Dartmouth has definitely given me is access to resources I couldn't possibly have imagined I'd be able to use. As an example, I was an organizer in the TEDx at Dartmouth, although unfortunately we had to close down due to the pandemic. In addition to that, I'm serving as an intern with the Academic Skills Center, where I get to help benefit first generation college students get prepared for school, and being an advocate for academia or just being successful in college is a passion of mine. I'm also a first-gen college student, although I didn't consider myself one for a very long time. So I feel like the change for me has been subtle, but that's only because I've been here for a very small amount of time. I know that's a really roundabout way to answer your question, but I'm really struggling to answer this one.
That's perfectly fair. Well, guys, this has been a real thrill and a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. Thanks to everyone who is listening in. And with that, I think we will.
Well, you'll turn it over to me, won't you?
I will turn it over to Steve. There you go.
All right, because well, thank you all. And one of the things I don't think we necessarily got at the very top of this meeting, well, I mean, we found out your names, your branch of service, your year and stuff like that. But where are you right now? We kind of know where Nathan is because he told us, and we've been struggling with your clock in the background there, Phil, because
someone had to say it.
Harry Potter land or something like that, and a different time zone altogether. Let's go around the room and tell us, where are you? Where are you? Anyone?
I guess I can start. I'm in Lebanon, New Hampshire.
All right.
I'm about an hour north of New York City.
What town?
I'm in Bedford at my parents' house.
Is that Bedford, New York, or I
It
don't
is.
know?
It is Bedford, New York.
All right. Well, wonderful. Nathan, you're also in New York.
I am in Albany, New York. So you go upstate, and then you keep going upstate, you get to Albany.
Yeah, right where just before the Mohawk comes in. And Phil, you're in Queens still?
Exactly.
No, I'm not in Queens. I'm in between actually Nathan and Kate. I'm in Ulster Park right now, visiting my parents. Yeah. So.
And your parents live in a different time zone.
Yeah.
All right, Brad, I know where you are, but tell us where you are.
Charleston, South Carolina.
All right, and Colson, I think. And yeah, Colson.
Yeah, I'm in the mountains east of Los Angeles in a place called Big Bear Lake.
Oh my gosh. As you know, I think I told you, I grew up in Pasadena, California. So Arrowhead and Big Bear, yeah, I know that. My point in that is to make 2 points, actually. Number one, thank you again, Phil, for being able and willing to do this virtual residency, because what it has meant is that we've been able to gather people from around the nation to participate with you in this way. And the second thing I'd like to say is that one of the things that Dartmouth seems to do extremely well is to weave alumni and students together into a tapestry that is a fairly solid one. You know, some of you have had experiences in different institutions. Dartmouth is almost insane. Maybe it's like the military in that way, where you get bonded into this environment, and you know, the granite of New Hampshire is in your muscles and your brains. And so the fact that we have somebody from the class of 2005 and somebody from the class of 2022, and you're all sisters and brothers in the enterprise of the service that Dartmouth has. And I think this panel represents that in one big way. And so I want to just thank you for that. Are there any, my husband asked me if I had any questions I was going to ask you, but I don't think I need to. But are there any final things that you'd like to say to the folks out there? You know, and like I said, this is recorded for all time, so you can, your final pitch about, and it doesn't have to be about rah rah Dartmouth, about just service, or thanking Phil, or whatever you'd like to do.
Well, I'd just like to thank my fellow panelists. I really enjoyed this, and I'm actually came already just very, very excited to see what some of you guys are going to do next. So yeah, it's great.
Thank you for having us. I enjoyed this. I
want to thank Phil and everyone else who participated with us. But thank you, Phil, for the book recommendation. And my book list is always long. The backlog never ends. But yours has kind of moved up to the forefront. So
I hope you like it.
You were so with the whole Times review, but now that you met Phil, you're gonna actually read it. Yeah. I also want to thank all of our panelists today. I think there's I'll leave with the Sebastian Junger book War, which I thought was a great book. The seminal question he asks is like, why why is it that we thank others for their service here, when in I think countries of like true warriors, like that does make a lot of sense. I think that all of us are kind of working towards a world in which the things that we're doing are not going to be a really extraordinary thing, that this is more of a common expectation that people can go and do as part of a rich and varied career. And I think you see the fruits of service by those that have gone and done it and watched their careers after. And so if there's any Dartmouth students that I think are watching this and wondering how are they going to make the world's problems theirs, I hope that they at least consider serving, because Lord knows that we certainly need more Dartmouth people to be wearing camouflage.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Nathan. I'd also like to thank the staff at the Montgomery Fellows Program, both Steve and Ellen, and Phil. Thank you so much for for directing this conversation, and to the other panelists. It's been great. And I just want to offer my appreciation for being invited on this panel. There are almost, I think, 30 undergraduate veterans just about on campus, and there are a lot of folks doing a lot of great things. So I'd just like to offer my appreciation for that, and for everyone who tuned in today to listen to our conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to Steve and Ellen and to the fellow panelists. It's been awesome to be a part of, and to everyone tuning in, thank you also. And Phil, thank you so much for the conversation, and in the continued endeavor to disprove Marine stereotypes of not being able to read and write. Good to be here.
We do all our drafts in crayon, don't we?
Exactly.
Well, if everyone's spoken, why don't I then wrap up and say thanks to all of you who participated in this roundtable and the other events that have comprised Phil's residency. A special thanks also go to Daniel Maxwell Crosby, our tech guru who kept everything moving behind the scenes and is recording this for us, and Ellen Henderson, the assistant director of the Montgomery Fellows Program and the tightener of the nuts and bolts of our enterprise. Once again, I invite you to go to Phil's homepage, or Phil's page on the Montgomery Fellows Program website for recordings of his previous conversations as part of his time with us, and a recording of this roundtable will also be posted there next week. Phil and his family will be our guests at the Montgomery House in the summer of 2021, where we will continue his residency face-to-face. Thank you and good night.